Chapter 1. Introduction. Defining the High Middle Ages. The High Middle Ages, stretching roughly from the year 1000 to 1300, stand as one of the great turning points in European history. If the early Middle Ages were an age of survival and slow rebuilding after the fall of Rome, the High Middle Ages were an age of expansion, confidence, and transformation. Europe, once fragmented and fragile, grew into a continent alive with bustling towns, awe-inspiring cathedrals, and monarchs who dreamed of great empires. It was an era when peasants coaxed more food from the soil than ever before, knights charged across battlefields with banners fluttering, and students in Paris and Bologna debated theology under candlelight. At the heart of it all was the Church, not just as a spiritual guide, but as the towering authority that shaped every life, from the humblest serf to the most powerful king. This was an age of crusades and pilgrimages, of Gothic spires reaching toward heaven, and of ideas that would one day ignite the Renaissance. But it was also a world of contradictions. Brutal wars fought in the name of Christ, deep inequalities between lord and peasant, and a rigid social order that promised stability but allowed little room for freedom. To step into the High Middle Ages is to enter a society both familiar and alien, a Europe on the move, setting the foundations of the world we know today. Chapter 2. Europe Reborn, Population Growth and Agricultural Revolution. Around the year 1000, something remarkable began to happen. Europe started to breathe again. For centuries, famine, plague, and invasions had kept populations small. Vikings raided from the seas, Magyars swept across the plains, and local warlords burned villages as quickly as they were built. But by the dawn of the second millennium, the tides had shifted. The raiders settled, peace became more common, and the land, long neglected, began to flourish. The heart of this rebirth lay in agriculture. Farmers across Europe adopted new technologies that revolutionized how they worked the soil. The heavy plow, once confined to the fertile regions of the north, spread across Europe, allowing farmers to cut deep into the tough clay soils. Horses, outfitted with better harnesses, replaced oxen as the beasts of burden, pulling plows faster and longer. And the three-field system, leaving one-third of the land fallow while rotating crops, multiplied yields. The results were dramatic. More food meant more people. Europe's population, which had languished for centuries, surged from around 35 million in 1000 to nearly 80 million by 1300. Villages that had once struggled to survive now grew into towns, and the surplus harvest fueled trade, crafts, and urban life. With fuller bellies came confidence. The High Middle Ages were not merely about survival, but about growth, economic, cultural, and spiritual. This agricultural revolution provided the foundation for everything that followed. Cathedrals, universities, crusades, and kingdoms all rested on the humble shoulders of the medieval plowman. Chapter 3. Feudalism and the Structure of Medieval Society. Medieval Europe is often imagined as a land of knights in shining armor and peasants toiling in fields, bound together by the system of feudalism. While historians debate how precise the term really is, the general picture is clear. Society was organized in a pyramid of loyalty and obligation. At the top stood kings, who claimed to rule by divine right. Below them were powerful lords, each controlling vast estates and commanding the loyalty of vassals. Knights pledged their swords to lords in exchange for land or protection. At the very bottom were peasants who worked the fields that sustained the entire structure. It was a world defined less by law than by personal bonds. A knight might kneel before his lord, place his hands in his lord's, and swear fealty. In return, the lord would promise protection and perhaps grant a small piece of land known as a fief. These relationships created a web of loyalties that stretched across Europe, binding men together in a system of mutual duty. For peasants, life was harder. Bound to the land as serfs, many could not leave without their lord's permission. They worked long days, paid taxes in grain, and owed labor service. Yet the village community gave structure and stability, and the rhythms of the agricultural year tied their lives to the seasons. Those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. This was the medieval ideal of society. The Church blessed this hierarchy as natural and God-ordained. While life at the bottom was harsh, this structure provided the order that allowed Europe to flourish in the High Middle Ages. Chapter 4: The Church Triumphant, Papal Power and Religious Life. If there was one institution that defined the High Middle Ages, it was the Catholic Church. It was not merely a spiritual guide, but the greatest landowner, the wealthiest institution, and the most powerful political force in Europe. At the heart of the Church's rise was the papacy. In the 11th and 12th centuries, reforming popes like Gregory VII sought to free the Church from secular control. Kings and emperors had long appointed bishops and even popes, but the investiture controversy challenged this. When Gregory VII clashed with Emperor Henry IV over who had the right to appoint bishops, the struggle symbolized a larger battle, whether the spiritual authority of the Pope stood above the temporal power of kings. The Church also shaped daily life in profound ways. From baptism to burial, every stage of life was marked by religious rituals. Pilgrimages to holy sites, Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, or Rome, became acts of devotion as well as adventures across medieval Europe. Monasteries flourished, centers of prayer, learning, and sometimes immense wealth. Faith was not always gentle. The Church wielded the weapon of excommunication, cutting rulers off from the sacraments and thus from salvation. Heresy was ruthlessly suppressed, for to question the faith was to endanger the unity of Christendom itself. Yet the Church also inspired beauty. The rise of Gothic cathedrals, vast structures of stone and glass, testified to a people who believed the divine touched the earthly. With spires pointing heavenward and stained glass windows bathing worshippers in colored light, they captured the essence of the High Middle Ages, a society striving upward toward God.